Welcome to the Investing in Inclusion interview series, where we are exploring the theme of what it means for business leaders and their organizations to move beyond merely pledging a commitment to diversity, to investing concretely in the policies, practices, and resources that create truly inclusive environments. These leaders advance principles of DEI, not just within their companies, but also in the communities in which they operate. Today, I am absolutely thrilled to be in conversation with Liz McAuliffe, Managing Director for Deloitte Asia Pacific Talent Transformation and the Talent Leader for Deloitte Asia Pacific Consulting. Welcome, Liz. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sharon.
Deloitte's DEI initiatives have long helped to move the business world forward on a number of fronts. As a DEI professional, it is truly a privilege to be in conversation with you. But first, I will introduce you to our audience. Liz has been a member of the Deloitte team for over 17 years. She has spent time in the Australia and Southeast Asia firms and is now a part of the Asia Pacific member firm based in Singapore. She has honed a range of leadership skills, including HR functional leadership, talent development, HR strategy and execution, coaching, and talent acquisition. And she has devoted significant time and energy to helping to lead Deloitte's inclusion initiatives here in Southeast Asia. Welcome to INSEAD, Liz, and we're actually here at INSEAD. Such a pleasure to have you here.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Sharon. Thanks. It's exciting to be here.
Now, I am sure members of our audience would love to know how your career journey has brought you here. And by here, I mean, what brought you to talent development, what brought you to Deloitte, and what brought you to Southeast Asia?
Sure. Thank you. It's funny when you start thinking about your own career in the context of the question that you just asked. I've been with Deloitte, it's coming up 18 years now, and it's been a significant proportion of my career. Joining Deloitte was a deliberate choice way back when. I used to work in recruitment in an agency environment and realized that my motivation was not in the commissions and the sales, it was around finding people their next opportunities. So I guess in essence, a bit of talent development right from the early stages. I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to move to Melbourne at that point in time and joined the firm as an internal recruitment manager. And it was really exciting to see people join the firm and see their careers progress and go, hey, I got them that. That was really cool. And at the same time, I was also studying a postgrad diploma in human resources, and I was recruiting actually an HR manager role. And I rang my boss and I said, I've got a problem with the role. And he said, what? I said, I really want to apply for it. And he said, oh, okay. and let me come back to you. And long story short, I was lucky enough, the firm took a gamble on me and I got that role. And that was my first, what I say, real HR role. And through then been in a number of different positions. Culminating in the Australian firm, I was the HR director for our audit practice, which was our largest business at the time. I always knew I wanted to give my kids the experience that I had when I was a child. Yes, I was an expat child myself. And so wanted to give them that same opportunity and said to Deloitte, I want to do this. Ideally, I'd like to do it with Deloitte. And I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to come up to Singapore on a secondment for 2 years and be the HR director for our Southeast Asia consulting practice, which had and still has some very, very aggressive growth targets. You can only be on secondment for so long in our firm. And at that point in time, I realized it wasn't probably the best time to go back to Australia and really be able to leverage everything that I'd learned. And I was lucky enough that a role was created for me in our Asia Pacific firm. And at that time, Asia Pacific had only been around for about a year or so in the formation that it is in at the moment. So lucky enough to come on board to the Asia Pacific talent team, and that role has now expanded to the role that I have here, which is two for one deal, looking after the talent agenda for our consulting practice across Asia Pacific and also supporting our Chief Talent Officer in the talent agenda with a focus on transformation of our practice.
And as I mentioned at the beginning, you have spent a fair amount of time supporting the firm's diversity and inclusion initiatives. How did you become involved in the leadership on that initiative?
It's an interesting place to be doing diversity, inclusion and equity, diversity, equity and inclusion, I should say, leadership. The practice is very diverse in itself. However, we are only as good as what we can offer our clients. And so it's really up to us to make sure that we mirror, match, align, whatever word you want to use, our diversity with our clients' diversities. Our clients don't want to see homogenous teams rolled out every time, same. They want to see teams that look like their organizations, that can relate and understand their organizations. So for us, diversity has always been a business imperative, probably before diversity was a thing as such. Having said that, now that it is a well-recognized business imperative, it's been a core part of our talent proposition for a long time. I think it's been interesting to see the evolution of the business's interest in the proposition of diversity, and now they're starting and have seen the impact that it can have in terms of a positive impact in clients and talent experience, and obviously in the bottom line as well.
Thank you. And you and I spend a lot of time thinking about inclusivity initiatives and really doing deep dives into how to embed these principles into the organizations where we work and have worked. But I think we're taking for granted a little bit that everyone understands what we mean by diversity.
Yes.
And sort of going back to first principles, defining diversity is really important. Of course, that could be a whole podcast in and of itself.
True.
Right? So why don't we just start by focusing on what falls under Deloitte's buckets for diversity? And I'm talking about which demographics are encompassed, what sorts of initiatives, just to give a framing reference.
Sure. Our diversity strategy is all-encompassing. And if you go into firms or geographies around the Deloitte network, you'll see an emphasis on different parts of that strategy. Our strategy is called All In, and that is, we want everyone to be all in. We want everyone to be all in, but we want everyone to be able to be all in, no matter who they are, where they're from, any other demographic. In Asia Pacific, we have a number of agendas that we are focusing on. That's not to say we're ignoring anything else, but this particular year, in our current financial year, we are staying true to our focus on gender, and that is something that is always important and is becoming more and more important as we progress. We have, I guess, accelerated or amplified a newer part of our diversity strategy, which is around accessibility. So that's accessibility from both a physical disability, but also through neurodiversity as well. We also have an acceleration, full stop, on mental health. I think everyone would no doubt agree the last few years have been incredibly challenging. Our profession has a reputation for being a little bit ruthless when it comes to people's work-life balance and mental health, and we want to really make sure that we are doing what we can. There is the added complexity of a hybrid model. It's a little bit different when you're sitting next to someone day in, day out to have a good, or better, shall I say, read on their mental health. When you're seeing someone through a Zoom call, half an hour every day, it's a little different to try and gauge that. So that is our focus. That's not to say we don't still very much have a strong emphasis on our LGBTQ agenda. That is very much still in play. But those are our three sort of areas that we're focused on in a heightened manner in this financial year.
And that is really helpful, particularly for those in our audience that are looking to start building a DEI framework. Yeah. This is so comprehensive. It really is. But it, I think, is also helpful to drill down a little bit on some of the things that you've mentioned. So you mentioned gender and also gender identity, LGBTQ. Yeah. And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more or give a couple of examples of the initiatives that you have in that space.
In the gender space specifically, we really need to work hard on our gender representation. We are very good at hiring at a graduate or analyst level, 50% men, 50% female. It is pretty simple. However, there are key and pivotal moments in someone's career in our environment where we lose women and we don't replace them. So there are some certain different areas, and it's not just people want to go and have babies, people want to go and get married. That's not really, it's not as simple as that. So what we really are focused on is trying to ensure that our women stay in our organisation. We want to make sure we have a representative leadership pool that is actually representative of all of our organisation and representative of our clients and our communities as well. So our initiatives, a couple of initiatives that spring to mind that have been focused on in the recent months is we've recently launched an Asia Pacific Inspiring Women program. And so this is aimed at what we would call our mid-career professionals, so manager, senior manager level. It's actually driven off a program that's been in place for a number of years in the Australian firm. I was lucky enough a long time ago to be a part of the Australian Inspiring Women's program. And it's a combination of professional development, experiences, leadership profiling, networking, building a cohort of people that you can call and go, oh my goodness, this just happened to me, and work through. So that is something where there is a small select group of women around Asia Pacific. So it's really nice that people are building cross-border networks as well. We're also in the process of expanding our pilot of what we call a return to work program. And this is focused not just on women, but primarily women tend to be the candidates who have been out of the workforce for whatever reason. And this is significant time out of the workforce, 3-5 years. And this is really focusing on, of course, it's not completely altruistic, right? There is a benefit to us. We have some areas in our firm, like our competitors, where we're really struggling to find talent. So really bringing this group of women or men into the organisation, training them, giving them a lot of training on what it's like to be back in the workplace. Has Excel changed? How do you use Zoom? All of those things that might not have been commonplace when they left the workforce. Some people have come from very different careers, and it's about bringing their professional development up so that they can enter a particular part of our team and feel confident around it as well, right? A lot of people, we find the reason they exit the workforce and then they don't re-enter is not through a skills gap, it's a confidence gap. So there's a lot around self-esteem, flexibility, confidence building, so that people can feel comfortable that the time they had out of the workforce is actually not a big deal. So those would be a couple of the gender-specific gender representation specific initiatives that we're working on at the moment. From a gender identity perspective, we have our very strong ally community, and that, I always think it's a really interesting initiative because it's actually not the people who are in this community who are working on this, but the impact that our allies have on both other allies and on the LGBTQ community is phenomenal. And so I think to me, it's a slightly different initiative to focus not necessarily on the community, but on the people around them to have that dual-based impact as well. And it's fantastic to see the support that we've had for that initiative. And as you would be well aware, we have environments all over Asia Pacific. We have very extreme jurisdictions and legislation frameworks we're working in. We can't do one size fits all at all, but what we can do is offer an environment to our employees that regardless of where they live, they can be themselves in our environment if that's what they want. And so it's a little different to say how we would treat some of our other diversity programs, but it's very much coming from a place of inclusivity and all in, literally, in that respect.
I think that this is so incredibly helpful. It can be daunting when you think about where to start on some of these issues, and especially those who have been so entrenched, right? Where it seems like you make some progress and then you step back, on a lot of the gender initiatives. So having these very specific examples of what's working and what you've tried is helpful. And then, as you mentioned, on gender identity, where it does vary so much, and focusing on allyship and having everyone feel like they are empowered to make a difference is such a great example. So I really thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think it really, to your point around people embarking on this and looking at the foundations, you've just got to understand your own organization first. And that's where, the power of data becomes very important. Obviously, without being intrusive, but it's finding as much as you can out about your employees really helps work out what is going to actually make a difference to your business in terms of progressing the diversity agenda. And that will look different for every single organization, and that's okay. It's, ultimately what we're trying to do is through creating a diverse and inclusive organization, what we actually end up with is diversity of thought, and that's what we're trying to crack, right? We it's great that we have everyone represented. That's obviously a lovely thing, but actually the diversity of thought that brings is where it allows us to be successful when we're working with our clients. So that, I think, is the real key to diversity. It's not actually just ticking a box and saying, yes, we've got all the right people in the room now. It's what can that bring compared to if you had everyone being more similar in their background.
This is so inspiring, and I really do hope that other business leaders who are looking for an example can find one in Deloitte and what you've done. And of course, you are, as a firm, a generator of content. And so for those who want to learn more, even more than we can fit into any one podcast episodes, they're fantastic reports that you put out. I use them as a resource all the time. And I want to say particularly congratulations on putting out your DEI transparency report and also your second annual Asia Pacific Impact report. And on the transparency report, I really love the fact that you are combining the concepts of transparency and inclusion, because this is necessary in order to bring about accountability. Right?
Absolutely. We're very fortunate to have an incredibly inspiring global CEO, Puneet Ranjan, and he is someone that takes transparency very seriously. I don't think I've ever worked with someone who is so open and candid, both positively and constructively, and recognizing where we're not doing well. And not beating one up about it, but we're not doing as well as we could here, so what can we do to improve? And then when we are doing well, really celebrating that and acknowledging those that contributed to it. And that goes right through the organization, but your point is valid. Transparency and inclusivity is a big step forward, and we're really proud of the fact that we have been able to do that. Our super recently launched Asia Pacific Impact Report is another big step in that. We really want to show the community and our clients what impact we're having in all facets of our business, including the diversity agenda.
That is a really important best practice as well. I think a lot of the times when companies focus on reporting on their best practices, North America, and in particular the United States, dominates, maybe UK, Europe as well, because those issues are particularly polarized right now, garner a lot of attention in the press. But it is really important to take a look at what's happening and working in particular regions. As you said, it is not a one-size-fits-all. And so you've already pointed to some examples of key successes you've had in the region. I wanted to give you an opportunity to highlight if there are any other particular Asia Pacific highlights from the report.
There's a couple of examples, not all that have been put in the report, but a couple of examples where we've been able to probably push the agenda a little bit further than perhaps the environment that we operate in. And I'll give you an example. It's probably about maybe 2 to 3 years old, and it seems quite an operational event. We look to enhance and renegotiate our health benefits. So super exciting, medical insurance. It doesn't get much better than that. And what we did was went through obviously a long process. Long story short, we secured a new provider. And I had one of our colleagues come up to me and he said, "Liz, this is the first time I feel included." And I said, "By health insurance?" And, potentially a little bit naive on my front. He said, "Yeah, our marriage is not recognised here, but our insurance now recognises him as a spouse." And he said, "I finally feel included as an equal player in our playing field." And I was like, wow, was a completely unintended byproduct, but incredibly important in an environment where being in a same-sex marriage is not recognised, but we were still able to recognise that in our own environment as well.
Liz, I think it would be really helpful for the business leaders who are looking to have very concrete examples to illustrate some of the concepts that we've been talking about, to understand how you have tackled some particularly noteworthy challenges. And I'm using a euphemism here, but how have you really been able to address either entrenched practices that are inhibiting inclusivity, whether you've encountered resistance to certain initiatives that you've tried to put into place, the things that it would be helpful for you to incorporate as you're telling a story, as you're really illustrating, painting the picture, are what was the issue or issues? How did you go about addressing it? What methodologies did you use? And the lessons that you learned, the big takeaways.
I've told the story, I've been in this story many times, and I think that in itself is a really good takeaway for business leaders. This is not something you do and dust off and put in the shelf and move on to the next thing. Diversity is continual, but the story that I'll use, which I have experienced a couple of times, is related to gender representation, particularly in our leadership positions in our organisation. As I mentioned earlier, we do lose women in certain parts of their career journey, and so we often end up with underrepresentation in the partner level. We also have some very ambitious goals around growth, and that is a challenge. Often growth is the priority, but what we really have to focus on is trying to help our leaders understand that growth with diversity is going to be far more impactful than growth for the sake of growth. When we recruit our leaders laterally, sometimes we bring in acquisitions, we bring in team hires, we bring in individuals. The focus is generally on what is the person going to bring, their clients, their skill set, their expertise, their ability to develop business or deliver particular engagements, less so on their gender. And so the challenge, and I don't think it's not ill will, it's not ignorance, it's not a lack of understanding. The focus is like, I don't care if they're male or female. I just want the person to do this particular job for our organisation because they will have this impact. So really we've got to help the leaders understand why it's important to, yes, focus on the growth and the skills and all of that good stuff, but to focus on bringing a gender diverse pool of people through to select from into those leadership positions. And there's a couple of ways that I think tend to make it easier. I was going to say simpler. It's not simple or easy, but one of the ways that can kind of get you through is to focus on the data. So understanding not just how many women and how many men we have, but what has been their history. Did they join us as graduates and come up through the organisation? Were they laterally hired in? What if they left, why did they leave? Where did they go? What was the reason? Not a generic online exit survey, but a one-on-one interview with a leader to really understand the rationale behind it. We also need to look at our clients. What do our clients want? Are our clients looking for diversity in our client teams? Yes, they are. We know that. We talk about the fact that they're challenged by what we're challenged on a regular basis as well. So the data is really important. But then the other key thing to actually turn that data into action is having the business leadership. And this is not a talent initiative. This is not an HR project. This has to be a business imperative for anyone to have any level of success. And where I've seen any resistance, and I would say maybe more reluctance than resistance to focus on this, has been able to be turned around is through strong business executive leadership in really being able to articulate why this is important. You add the complexity of an Asia-Pacific environment or a Southeast Asia environment where culturally female participation in the workforce varies significantly. And you really have to understand that not everyone is going to end up with a 50-50 outcome in this. And for some teams, it might be 10-15% female is significantly more than what they have now, and that's going to make a huge difference. So it's about adjusting the playing field to the cultural environment, to the societal environment, and to, in some respects, the maturity of the leadership as well, and then really using that data to support them. The other element that I would say is it's got to be about co-design and co-creation. There is no point in coming in with a playbook and saying, here, please leader, go ahead and tick all of these boxes and you are done. It has to be something that they are involved in, that they have input in, and skin in the game, I guess, is really what it is. So the couple of times where I've run into this maybe a bit more of a crisis point where the representation has not been where it is, it's been this this moment of using the data, getting the business leaders to really drive this and making sure that it is a collaborative and co-designed approach to really have any traction. And if you are a talent leader and you don't have that, you may as well focus on something else.
So true and incredibly well said. But I also want to ask, one of the best ways we can help is to, as people who are focused on inclusivity and really and truly wanting to embed this and spread it, as much as we can, is saving people from reinventing the wheel. And so, you have described some really difficult and complex challenges. In hindsight, are there some approaches that you would have that you would have shifted, or anything that you would have done differently in trying to move the organization in the ways that you've talked about?
The one thing that I would have done differently was to be bolder earlier. And not just being bold without rationale behind it, but be bold and stick to your guns, I think is probably what it is. And being willing to say to a leadership group, if this is not your priority, then let's focus on something else. Because there is no point in creating pretty PowerPoint decks and talking about it and getting a lot of nodding and agreement and no action. So being bold enough to call it out if it's not getting traction, being bold enough to shift if it's not working in that way, stopping, recognizing not everything works. Okay, what didn't go right and what do we need to shift, and then adjusting and moving on. But to be a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion, or some combination of that, you have to be bold, you have to be persistent, you have to be very resilient, and you have to make sure that you are doing any of these initiatives hand in hand with your business leadership if you want to have the traction you're hoping for.
Absolutely. And you've already shared so much advice that is going to make a big difference. And every day Deloitte does make a difference in the ways that its information is used and implemented globally. I want to bring it back a little bit more locally here to INSEAD and ask for our students, who we are confident are going to be the next generation of business leaders. What advice would you give to an INSEAD student who's about to embark on the MBA journey? And specifically, I would ask you to focus on what competencies should they be building in order to be inclusive leaders? What are you looking for as an employer?
There are a number of things. My advice to a new grad coming into an academic environment is to really keep checking yourself with all of the amazing concepts and theories and academia that they'll be exposed to. Checking yourself in terms of how could this be applied in the real world? What would this do if I was to actually do this in a practical commercial environment? Really sense checking along the way, because a lot of what is taught is amazing, but the way it is then applied in a practical sense is not the same way. And so the advice would be, be practical, be a realist, and sense check yourself throughout, which then leads into the competencies that we look for. And head and shoulders above anything else is the ability to have a level of emotional intelligence. To be an inclusive leader, you've got to show empathy, you've got to show resilience, you've got to show a vast range of emotions that you could put under EQ. If you don't have the EQ to recognize the differences in your team, it's going to be incredibly challenging to lead them successfully. Combined with EQ, and I don't know how you teach this, right? But common sense is probably the other thing that I would add. It's amazing how uncommon common sense is, and it's one of the things that we really look to incorporate in our onboarding, not just at an MBA level, but for all of our new joiners, because that practical application of learning in a real world environment often comes down to your ability to use common sense. And I think finally, and not necessarily more or less important, is the resilience. Leading in an inclusive environment successfully is not always going to be fun. It's going to be hard, it's going to be confronting, and it's going to be challenging. And you have to have a level of self-resilience to be able to really drive an agenda through, whether it's a core part or a peripheral part of your role. You've got to have a little bit of a thick skin.
Liz, thank you so much for all the advice that you've shared. But more than that, thank you for all that you do in this space. It is incredibly inspiring to many of us. And personally, I really do take a lot of energy and inspiration from the work that you've done at Deloitte. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time today. It has been such an absolute pleasure.
Thank you, Sharon. It's been a lot of fun.